In this episode, I chat with Melissa Robertson, an impressive and respected leader within the advertising industry. She openly and candidly shares her journey with peri-menopause, including what it was like experiencing her first few symptoms in a new role as CEO, as well as her important work with Menopause Mandate. So thank you to Melissa Robertson for joining us here today on the Living Health podcast to talk about your personal journey with peri-menopause, with a special focus on career life, work life. It's a big topic. It's an important topic. You're a respected leader in the advertising industry, and it can't have been easy to climb that ladder. So I'm excited to learn a bit more about that as well. So before we get stuck into the questions, I always like to ask an icebreaker question around your period, your last cycle, and how you sleep generally. But you did say that the answer to both of those questions would be wildly different. So now I'd love to ask you both. How is your last period cycle? How are your periods generally? And how did you sleep last night? And how is your sleep generally?
Well, my period cycle is I honestly couldn't really tell you because it's wildly erratic. Sometimes I can have a period for 3 months without stopping. And then sometimes I don't have it for several months. In fact, a couple of years ago, I didn't have one for 6 months. And then my 13-year-old daughter came on for the first time and I started getting them again. I really thought I was out the other end. So that wasn't true. But yeah, it can just be really exhausting because you do feel as if you're just constantly losing blood and just managing it is so frustrating. Sometimes it'll start for a bit and then stop for a day and then come back. It's exasperating. So yeah, I'm definitely not out to the other side of perimenopause because I need another year from when it fully stops for that to happen. Sleep is actually interesting because a couple of years ago, a menopause specialist advised that I took progesterone every day rather than on 2 weeks, off 2 weeks. So you take it every day in the evening. It does actually help sleep. But I've also recently started taking, someone recommended lion's mane. They did say that they'd had quite wild dreams. And I did have a really weird dream, which I was telling my husband about this morning on a dog walk. Sadly, our dog she's not very well. She's got terminal cancer, but she's going through chemo at the moment and she's fine because she's on steroids and stuff. But in the dream, and I don't think it was even necessarily her, I was spooning a dog in the bed. Aww. And there was also a horse.
Yeah.
So I don't know where the horse came in. I don't have a horse.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay.
Wild dreams and erratic periods is probably the simple and short answer to your question.
Great. Wow. We'll get into more of the symptoms that you've been experiencing shortly. I think it's good to start with a bit about you and what you do. And I think it would also be good to start leading up to now with your work life because that will really shape the conversation that we're about to get into.
Yes. Okay. Maybe just skip back even a little further just for context. So in 2011, I co-founded a creative agency with 3 other people. And when I started it, I had 3 children under 5, which was a bit bonkers, but it felt like the right thing to do at the time. And things were quite busy. You're always on, I suppose, when you're running an agency and trying to grow it. And probably, I would say, about 5 years after that, I started experiencing some early menopause stuff, but we'll probably come back to that. Ran that agency and then decided to leave after 8 years and do something else. Did a bit of consultancy for a bit. COVID hit, which is very strange when you've got lots of children at home and they're having to do lessons at home. I was doing consultancy at that time. But then in the September of that year, I started a new job as CEO of a creative agency focused on sport called Dark Horses, which I did for 5 years. And I've just left that in the summer to go consultancy again and to do a bit of portfolio, non-exec stuff and a bit plural, I suppose it's called these days.
Busy last few years.
Yeah.
If someone were to describe you, I guess, you as a person, you and your work life, how would someone describe you?
If it was someone at work, they would probably say that I had quite high standards, but I really cared about people. If you're asking my husband, he'd say really, really stubborn. But I think I turn that into a positive in that I'll always, by hook or by crook, manage to make something happen.
Yeah. Okay. And now I want to get into your journey with perimenopause. How would you summarize it?
Roller coaster.
Yeah. Okay. And now let's start from wherever you want to start with this journey that you've had.
I suppose I really only realised that I was properly going through perimenopause when I started that new role at Dark Horses, because that's a really weird time. That was the first 9 months of COVID when, yes, I was working and doing stuff, but it was a little bit on my own terms. I wasn't having to look after other people other than the kids. And I started this new job and it just hit me like a train. My biggest issue, and it remains to this day, has been not a brain fog. It's never been woolly. It's just been an utter loss of words. I just completely can't find words, to the extent that I think I've actually developed a different pattern of speech to compensate, because sometimes you just have to find different ways of saying it. It's like playing a permanent game of articulate, or just trying to find the breadcrumbs that I've left in my own brain to try and remember a word. And there are certain words with certain letters in that are particularly problematic. I've worked out with my husband. The S's and C's are particularly bad for some reason. P's aren't great. But it's not exclusively those letters. So it was that time when you'd jump on calls with your mates to do a Zoom call and catch up. And so there were a group of whatever we were, women in our late 40s. And so I was sort of talking about this to them and then talking about a few other things. And we all agreed that we were absolutely of the age to be going through menopause. And I just hadn't realised it at all. And I don't think really they had until we just suddenly started talking about it. And it made me realise that I'd probably been going through it for a few years prior to that. It just hadn't been so evident. I think the realisation was down to the job role, the sort of responsibility that I suddenly had, and the symptoms suddenly became more apparent, particularly the word issues. Because when you're doing things remotely, you can have notes. But I was going into the office and meeting people, and I just couldn't remember, not necessarily names of people at work. I definitely can't remember surnames, but their first names I was quite good at. But names of, I don't know, athletes that you're putting in a piece of marketing, or any words to try and describe what it is that you're trying to do for a client.
Was there a particular moment that you just stands out when that kind of happened and you felt really under pressure?
In fact, not necessarily one particular moment, but because I'd started realising there were certain words that I was losing, I just had a notebook, and because there was still quite a lot of remote stuff, you'd use quite a lot of repetitive words in business. And so I'd write them down, codify, strategy. It was ridiculous, but I'd sort of write them down, and my brain is quite visual. When I was certainly on a call, I could just go to the notebook and quickly find the word. The problem is that some of them remain the same and some of them changed over time, but it helped. But when I first realised it was, you're talking to people, you're sometimes doing an agency meeting, and the fear of embarrassment and humiliation is quite frightening and certainly demoralising.
Yeah, okay. That's a lot. That's a lot. A new job, CEO, is the best of times, a lot of pressure. You said you spoke to your friends about it, but how did you speak to your team about it? Did you speak to your team about it? What was the agency's attitude towards things like perimenopause, menopause at that time?
So it was quite a small agency, under 50 people, and I guess I was the leader. And there were a lot of young people there, lots of people under 30. So I just don't think it had been a topic of conversation. There wasn't anybody that was even near the age of menopause other than me. I think I've always been reasonably candid. I sort of had all these tactics, but I'd say to people, look, I've just got this real issue with words. I can't remember them. It's really embarrassing. But just jump in. If you can see me flailing, just jump in and say it. You won't be mansplaining. And actually, that just really unlocked something, because I think that sort of ability to own up to frailties is quite reassuring, was quite reassuring for the rest of the team, and actually perhaps unlocked an opportunity for everybody to be able to voice some of the challenges that they're navigating. But I know that it really helped me. And as a result of it, I actually wrote about it in industry press and said, actually, this is something we should really talk about, because I'm only managing to navigate some of these challenges because I can talk about it, and I feel that we should be talking about it a bit more, because no one really knows or understands anything about it and how they can support people going through it.
That is quite brave, because it's always a risk that people won't respond to it. Like, I have ADHD, and in my role, I have to be seen in a certain way, or my role that I used to be in, which is PR, your right-hand woman to the CEO, and you have to be on it. It can be quite scary, and how they're going to react, and are you going to get pushed away, Or are people going to respect that vulnerability?
It's so true. I think if there's a more sort of open door policy on stuff, it gets a bit easier. But yeah, I've spoken to plenty of people who've been really anxious about telling their bosses about it in case they're overlooked for promotion because it's easier to promote the bloke who's not losing his mind.
Or if you make a mistake, is it, oh, that's just ADHD, that's just perimenopause? Actually, no, I'm just a human being.
Yes, exactly.
That makes mistakes.
Exactly. I think it's very similar. That's why all of these things, people who were able to talk about their ADHD or dyslexia or mental health challenges, and I really embraced it because I think everyone's different and everyone responds differently. And if there's just a little bit of respect and empathy around the challenges that other people navigate, why wouldn't you want that?
Everyone's struggling with something, and when you share what you're struggling with, they're like, okay, less pressure on me.
But it makes you less anxious.
Yeah.
That's the other thing, because there's this sort of, see, now I can't think of the way to describe it, this self-fulfilling prophecy, I guess, where you feel anxious about messing up, which makes you even more anxious, which makes you more likely to mess up.
Yeah.
So you get out of that hideous circular issue.
Yeah, it's about that calming state of mind. And actually, the menopause expert that we spoke to, she does a lot of CBT therapy in her work because that seems to be attached to perimenopause, menopausal symptoms, and that anxiety and that pressure that women put on themselves. Now thinking about, you've gotten these symptoms, you're starting to realize what it might be. Where did you go to next? What were the conversations with maybe your doctor or?
That was the thing. I really didn't do anything about it. And though I suppose I put in place some of my own tactics, like the glossary at the big front of my book, which really helped. I was sweating profusely at night, like really, I'd wake up absolutely soaking. So we actually bought a Peloton, and so I'd try and go on that every day because, my God, you sweat like nothing I've ever sweated before.
Really?
And I could have thought, oh, maybe I'll just take control of the sweat. And actually that did help to an extent. And there are just other things, actually, I'm slightly itching myself thinking about it. But all of these things that you look back on, the sort of itchiness, like really bizarre. If ever I see a woman itch their lower back or slightly under their armpit, I realise they're menopausal or perimenopausal because no one realises you're losing your collagen, so everything just becomes a bit drier. But yeah, itchy, I just use more creams and stuff. So I started creating all of these tactics, and it was okay. There's a wild variety of symptoms, 50 plus, and I was experiencing I don't know how many of them. The other one is just general achiness because your body's infrastructure is getting a bit more wobbly. It's sort of not holding itself together in quite the same way, and everything just aches a lot. So I just carried on using my own tactics until, as a result of the article that I'd written, I was asked if we had a menopause policy at work, and we didn't. And I thought, why would we have one? I'm literally the only person going through it. And then I had that road to Damascus moment when I thought, oh, maybe it's because it shouldn't be just for me. It should be for everyone else to understand how to help other people navigate it. Everybody should understand this. Everyone's got a mum, a colleague, a client, a supplier, a friend that's going to be going through it, partner. So I spent a few months writing one, and I made it open source. And I was then invited to join a new not-for-profit called Menopause Mandate. And I know we'll perhaps talk about that a bit later, but it was only then did I meet people that really knew what they were talking about. And everyone, the first thing they said was, are you on HRT? I was like, no. I honestly hadn't even thought about it. And they went, I would really recommend you talking to your doctor.
And did you?
Yeah. So I talked to a doctor. She was a female doctor. It was just on the phone. And I just said, I've now realised I've been going through it for a few years. And then went on to some progesterone pills and gradually upped the amount. But it wasn't a sort of huge, it wasn't a sort of, I've spoken to people who've gone, that was it. That just absolutely, I've never felt better. And there was a moment when I just suddenly realised. I've not actually experienced that. I sort of wonder what would happen if I stopped taking them, which I'm not going to do. Because then the different symptoms keep coming. Perhaps a couple of years after that, I started just experiencing anxiety like I've never felt before I've really never been a particularly anxious person. And I put my hand across my chest here because it's very visceral and you feel like completely overwhelmed. But I just kept on getting to the max I could get to on HRT. And I think it did help. I guess I also tried to teach myself, to remind myself that I've been in situations that are stressful before and I shouldn't react in this way. There's a lot of self-talking you do. And then somebody said that I should perhaps try testosterone. And you can only get prescribed testosterone in the UK through either a private practice or through a menopause specialist. And the wait for a menopause specialist is 9 months. But I just thought, look, if I'm doing stuff in this space, actually, I want to have experienced it like other people have experienced it. So I waited 9 months, like a whole baby. I could have had a whole baby. Wow. And it really was 9 months. And then the other thing they advised me when asking for testosterone, because it hasn't had the appropriate checks in the UK for women, you can't say that it's because you think you're going mad or your brain's going. You have to say that it's about your libido or something like that. So,
do you think it's helped, the testosterone?
It hasn't helped the word holes, no. But again, I think perhaps the combination of all of it's just made it slightly less shit.
Okay. So you're going through all this anxiety, like you say, all these symptoms, and then you're putting this article together to go out to the industry. Just to jump back a little bit, I'm sure that would have been nerve-wracking. Like, how are people going to respond to that article and you going so publicly out there? How did people respond to that?
Oh, it was incredible, actually, because this was back in, it must have been in 2020. It must have been quite early after I'd started the job, because I really did feel that I was losing my mind, and that's what I wrote. I just tried to be really honest about what it was like to experience it, but also the help and support of other people demonstrating sort of empathy and understanding. And loads of people just got in touch and said how refreshing it was to have somebody publicly talking about it without fear. And perhaps it was easy. I was running a small company. I didn't have bosses in the same way as most other organisations. So you are a little bit more in control of your own destiny. But I think it was just really reassuring. Lots of people got in touch and asked for support and said, you should keep talking about it.
I think can be all so nerve-wracking and quite brave to go out there and say that. And especially because I think we're talking about menopause more and more, which is amazing, but definitely more than when that article would have gone out.
Oh, 100%. Literally, I think nobody else in advertising, maybe the year before or something like that, but nobody in advertising had talked about it at all.
And do you think going through that affected your career, or not really, because you had this sort of amazing team around you that rallied around you?
I think it definitely has affected my career, but actually I would say in an incredibly positive way. As an agency, it was really nice because everybody was so supportive. When I got involved in Menopause Mandate, we did pro bono campaigns and the agency worked on it and they loved it. We did some award-winning stuff, which is always nice for an agency to do. The really lovely thing was several people in the agency also wrote about menopause as men or as younger women. And I found that really wonderful, actually, because there's no point having all of these discussions in an echo chamber. Sure, there are lots of people who perhaps don't realise they're going through menopause and it's critical that they do understand. But actually, I think it's really important that younger women at least have an inkling of what might be happening so they realise sooner. And men need to know so that they can support women they know going through it.
How do you think it maybe, or did it affect your relationships, your friendships positively, negatively, or neither?
I don't think so. I became a bit of a laughing stock at home because I would always go, well, it's the menopause. And they'd be like, yeah, that's your excuse. There was one particular incident where my husband's an artist and in fact, it was near here in Farringdon. Somebody had bought some of his work and I worked in Farringdon. So he said, oh, can you drop it off? So I dropped it off to this woman who's a theatre critic. And she paid in literally a rolled up thing of notes. It was like really, it felt like a drug deal.
Yeah.
And so I took the money back and gave it to my husband and made some joke about it's like a drug deal. And then the next day he said to me, have you got the money from the art? And I was like, I gave it to you yesterday. And he went, I don't remember. And I said, I literally gave it to you, handed it over, made a gag about drug deal. And he went, and he was actually really nice about it. He was like, where were you standing when you said it? I actually walked him to the bit of the kitchen we were standing in and went, we're standing right here, gag about drug deal. And he went, okay. And he backed off. And I just thought, idiot. And then that night, I woke up in the middle of the night, one of those just things where you sit bolt upright. And I thought, oh, shit. And I suddenly remembered that the thing I had remembered when I'd supposedly given him the money, I'd taken it out of my coat pocket. And then I remembered that I'd cycled back and I thought, do you know what? I better not put it in my coat pocket in case it bounces out. And I put it into my massive cycling bag. So in the middle of the night, I went back downstairs, opened the massive cycling bag, and there it was. I must have dreamt it.
Oh, wow. Oh, my God.
I mean, it was so vivid. It was so real, right down to the point that I knew where I was standing.
How bizarre.
Anyway, so yeah, drug deal is used as, it's kind of,
code name.
Code
Anyone
name,
overhearing
code
might
name
think
for,
it's strange, but
me being an idiot.
It sounds like your husband's been quite supportive and quite gentle in his approach.
He was then, yeah. He didn't. I think he just thought, I'll leave her to work it out.
Yeah.
It's gonna be better.
How has he been on this sort of journey with perimenopause?
I think he found it quite hard. I think lots of partners find it quite hard because there hadn't been really any discussion about it. Oh my God, that was my stomach.
Don't worry,
really
I wasn't sure if it was mine or yours.
It's totally mine. Sorry about that.
Hungry.
So fun. I do have a very chatty stomach.
I actually do as well, so it's nice that someone else is for a change.
I was literally listening on the way into a podcast where for a whole 10 minutes they were talking about Celia Imrie farting
really?
on celebrity traitors.
Oh my God, that was my favourite.
So good. But at least it wasn't that embarrassing.
Yeah.
I think it's very hard for partners to navigate it because there hadn't, certainly when I started going through it, there hadn't been such much public discourse. Davina had gone out with her documentary, but I hadn't watched that and my husband hadn't watched it. Nobody really understood the sort of biology that was happening. When I wrote the policy, I just couldn't, everything was so opaque. So I would say that I was feeling these things, but I think he just couldn't quite comprehend it. And it was only later, I think perhaps when I started getting slightly more, I would perhaps say traumatic symptoms like anxiety, really quite dark feelings of depression, that I actually had to sit him down, or we'd go on a dog walk and I'd say, you have to understand, you have to understand how I'm feeling. I can't control it. And I'm doing everything I can to tell myself this isn't rational, this isn't real, everything's okay. But it's sometimes really difficult. And I think it was at that point that he really began to understand. Because I suppose there's been a lot of jokes around hot sweats and brain fog and stuff like that. And perhaps a lack of empathy about how it really makes you feel, particularly in the workplace where, you are at risk of jeopardizing, I don't know, client relationships or something going out or whatever it might be, just because things haven't gone quite right down to what you're going through.
That leads on to how has this all affected your sense of self?
I guess I've become quite interested in knowing yourself a bit better. And I read this really great book called Chatter, which is all about how to control sort of the voices inside your head, which is probably far more about imposter syndrome, but I feel can be applied in this situation, particularly when you're having uncharacteristic feelings. And so I'm quite interested in that. And I guess in parallel, the problem with menopause is that it's happening at an age invariably where your kids are also having wild, hormonally driven issues. Your parents are a bit elderly. So all of this is happening in quite a stressful time of life, perhaps, whilst holding down a decent job and all of that. And my eldest was really been affected by COVID and was really struggling with anxiety and depression. And we ended up doing family therapy, which honestly one of the best things we ever did. So all of these things coalesced at the same time, where actually I was talking far more with the people that I care about most about how we feel about each other, about life, about everything. And part of me in those sessions was like a really fascinated fly on the wall of going, this is really interesting in terms of psychology and how people navigate the world and each other. And I feel it just helped me understand people and how different they are and how they view the world, and how we'd all need to be a bit more respectful about people who have ADHD and how they navigate the world and how you can support them, or whatever other challenges people may be navigating. So in that respect, I think it's been quite helpful to understand myself a bit more, but actually also other people and differing challenges that they navigate.
I can imagine, because I think you're obviously quite a good communicator, but communicating with your family and being so vulnerable, it sounds easy, but I imagine it's so hard.
We'd have these sessions once a month, and they'd said, it would be really helpful if you try and continue these kind of conversations at home, pick a quiet time, on a Sunday and sit down. We tried once. You can't do it because you need to have someone helping you, because the things that you talk about are unbelievably banal. But also you've got somebody helping channel the conversations. And because you're having these in front of somebody else, it's far more respectful. So even if you're saying something that perhaps is uncomfortable, you have to say it in a far more considerate way than perhaps you would in a slightly more charged environment where you've got nobody who can hold you to account.
So you said that as well, you were going through all of this when one of your daughters was starting her journey with puberty. Obviously, it was good because you were quite open with her. How open were you with your mother about things like that, menopause?
My mum's hilarious because she just, when I told her about experiencing these things, she just went, oh, darling, I just breezed through menopause, took red clover, it was absolutely fine. And I just thought, hang on a second. When I look back to her 40s, she was mad as a box of frogs.
Right.
And it was a bit of a wild ride, but she doesn't or won't remember it.
Yeah.
And there's no point forcing someone to try and remember something. But yes, it definitely affected her. I don't know for how long, but yes, it's not something she particularly wants to be drawn on. And perhaps it is a generational thing where they just put their head down and got on with it, and it wasn't discussed, and you just had to make do and keep going.
Yeah.
But I do think, what I've said to some of the younger people at work is, when I first started talking about it, if you're going home for the weekend, why don't you just sit down with your mum and watch the Davina documentary? Because it's a really good way of breaking the ice.
Yeah.
And actually finding out a bit more, but doing it in a way that is mutually bonding.
So now moving on slightly to the work that you do with Menopause Mandate, you recently did quite a funny but eye-opening campaign with Amazon, and Davina McCall was a part of it.
Yeah.
And I think there was some funnier themes, but some darker themes as well, around medical gaslighting and women feeling distressed. What has been the response to that? What have you heard from women, and how have you applied your own situation to that campaign?
I've always felt that if we get more people talking about it, it will just become less of a stigma, more normalised, and that will make the experience less charged and less stressful. It's not going to remove it. I think there's sort of plenty of other stuff that can be done in terms of scientific research and insight and whatnot. But for now, I just think public discourse is really important. And at Menopause Mandate, we campaign for things that genuinely make a difference. The HRT, you used to have to pay for estrogen and progesterone every single month, which cost over 200 quid a year. We successfully campaigned, and they've now introduced a couple of years ago the single prescription charge. So you only pay once a year. So it's 20 quid instead of over 200. And we've campaigned for other bits and pieces. But I guess my role there is far more about that public discourse. And I just feel really strongly that we cannot be talking in an echo chamber, that we have to get more people talking about it. But by doing it in a way that uses humour can be incredibly disarming. And because if you've got somebody pointing a finger and going, you need to care about us, what we're going through, automatically feel as if you might be backing off. We've used humour really successfully. We put on a comedy night last year with 11 comedians. And then we just thought we'd carry on the theme this year. And Amazon were absolutely amazing in supporting us. And we together came up with this insight that actually giving reviews is incredibly cathartic, particularly if they're not positive. It gets it out of your system. And so we thought, well, if we can encourage people to give reviews on Amazon, we're going to have to create a product. So we said that the product was menopause and put menopause for sale on Amazon. But really, it's a donation to Menopause Mandate, pay 99p. You get a little PDF of some quite fun discussion around the symptoms. But really what we want is for people to leave a review. And some of them have been really honest in a upsetting way. It's very difficult. But some people have really lent into the humour of it and done the whole called customer services. They wouldn't give me my money back, and just funny jokes about gaslighting, and just lent into that humour bit of it. And I think what's great about it is that I've spoken to loads of people who have then gone and read all of the reviews. And you can have both a laugh and an understanding that it is really challenging to navigate, and it's really heartbreaking, but it's nice to feel that you're not alone.
Yeah, I think it was absolutely brilliant. And I think the comedy aspect to it just means that I feel like men feel like they can be more a part of the discussion. And like you say, it's not blaming anyone. It's just bringing everyone together and saying this is a problem. This needs more awareness.
Yes. In fact, I had a man get in touch with me over the weekend and say, is it okay for a partner to leave a review? And I said, absolutely. We'd love to hear your stories. And the amount of people that I've spoken to who've said things like regularly collecting the phone from the fridge and weird stuff like that.
If you could give one piece of advice to businesses, or your top one thing or top three things that businesses should be doing more or better when it comes to menopause and supporting their employees around that, what would you suggest?
Obviously, I feel that every organisation should have a policy, and one that's written in a way that everybody in the organisation can and should read. But having a policy isn't enough. I think there's got to be a sort of an attitude shift, because it's just back to the feeling you fuck up. There cannot be a whole cohort of women of a certain age that are made to feel that they can't continue in work through lack of support, because you're losing a whole swathe of unbelievably talented people who have an awful lot of experience, arguably perhaps a great deal of EQ as well, that make organisations better. So if businesses want to have fully rounded organisations that, by the way, will still make plenty of money because you're making the places a better place to be, they need to find ways to properly socialise how to understand more and how to support.
That's a really good point, actually. And having a policy that you can measure, like the impact, the results of in some way,
yes,
I think is really important, because the gender pay gap, for example, is one aspect to have that policy, but actually measure the impact.
And the gender pay gap is that it just really dramatically increases when women hit their 40s. Yeah, sure, childbirth does make a difference, but I think that there's people I don't think really understood how frightening that fall off is, because women just don't think they can go through it. And if they haven't got somebody at a senior level supporting them and telling them they can, why would they?
Yeah, exactly. Now, coming to our last few questions, time has really flown past. What one piece of advice would you give a partner supporting their female partner through menopause?
Acknowledgement. We joked around it with the Amazon campaign. It's so easy to gaslight without realising you're doing it. And I think just acknowledging that actually what they're going through is tough and you're there to support them. Because if you're having to also conceal it a bit at work and then conceal it a bit at home, you're talking spontaneous combustion. It's just not fair. So I think partners actually understanding it, telling their partners that they know and get it, and asking how they can support them is just so huge.
And what would you say to someone struggling through that perimenopause or menopause at the moment?
Hopefully, one of the things that we have also achieved is getting menopause included in the 40 plus health check. So hopefully it will be covered off at a medical level. I think that will take time to navigate. Do speak to a medical professional, but I don't think all the answers are there. So it's worth reading up, but talk to other women. Word of mouth is always a really brilliant thing. And I have to say, I've probably learnt most of the stuff, and I definitely wouldn't consider myself an expert, but most of the stuff I know through talking to people who've experienced it. And I've tried lion's mane, I've tried magnesium, I've tried vitamin B or evening primrose oil or whatever it might be. and exercise or the glossary or whatever. Just there will always be tips and tricks. So talk about it. Talk about it. Do not keep it inside, because it will only get worse if you do that.
Is there something that you wish you could tell yourself like 5-10 years ago before you started this journey?
That I didn't know about it. I was going through it for several years before I even realised I was going through it. And then I waited a couple of years to actually explore some medication. Yeah, so I wish I'd known more earlier.
And is there a way that people can get involved in everything? Can they donate? Can they contribute?
Definitely go to Amazon and pay 99p and leave a review. We'd love it. Even if people are talking about their mums or partners, but obviously women going through it, and write it from the heart, write a positive review, write a negative review. They're all just incredibly valid. But yes, we do. There are resources on Menopause Mandate that businesses can tap into, and we'll have events from time to time. So yeah, just get on the mailing list.
Great. Thank you so much. That's all we have time for today. But yeah, thank you so much. And I can't wait for everyone to hear this.
Thanks, Jo.